Yeah, so I was looking at the state of practice at that point and looking at what my options are, what opportunities there were for me to really kind of like develop my career. And really the options out there very broadly was that, I could either join a really big firm, like a corporate company working on large institutional commercial projects like a Gensler or back then it was like maybe like RTKL or whatever. Or I could join like a large, design heavy type outfit, which some of my colleagues had done. Like, for example, Frank Geary's out here, I'm sure everybody says, right? Like a lot of my colleagues are going to his model shop and building a lot of models. Or I could, hook up with a small boutique office, doing small projects here. And I kind of chose the latter. And as I was working with this small boutique office, right, I made a number of additional observations, which weren't they were kind of discouraging and somewhat like not very exciting. Because like what I found out was that like in general, like, the role of the architect was quite sort of like marginalized. I mean, a lot of the potential clients and projects that came in were really, they really weren't looking for design as much as they were really looking for a set of drawings and a permit. And so, looking at these options, it was just, I wasn't sure how we were I was gonna move forward. And then right around that time, I was reading some articles that were running around, and there's this guy named Dave Hickey. I actually have on the screen here is one of the quotes from this guy. He's an art critic from Vegas. He's written a couple of books, and he really laid into. I think he had an interview at SIRE. He really laid into the way architects are, and his deal is basically like, architects aren't excused from the pressures and exigencies of market economics. And then just to summarize that interview that he had, is just that like what he was basically saying is that like like just architects need to go out and build stuff, and if you were to go out and build stuff, you basically risk failing. And if you risk failing, then you're actually failing some more, and so the more you fail, that's the American way of success. But more importantly for me, it was like he was saying that where you actually go and build stuff, where the intersection of design with like the sort of implementation, which is the with the builders and the craftspeople, is actually the site of the true invention is actually discovered. And so this was really inspiring to me to hear this. That like I was kind of like discouraged by the way the conditions that I was sort of facing as a practitioner. And to hear that this guy was saying that, hey man, like you should really go out and build stuff. And so then the next challenge really for me was that, hey, like what, how would I go build stuff? Because I don't have like a lot of money, and so of course I started looking around and I started realizing that like a lot of architects actually started out by building their own homes, right? Like, so, Tom Main has a 6th Street house. Carlos Jimenez actually built his house in Houston. In fact, he still works out of it, and he lives there. That's Jimenez studio. And of course, Mr. Frank Gehry actually has his famous house that he did in Santa Monica in the 70s that really kind of like kickstarted his career. And so what I basically did, what most architects do, is that like I negotiated with my parents. They owned a little kind of like triplex out in this an eastern suburb of Los Angeles. This is an aerial view of San Gabriel. It's like mostly Asian immigrants. You can see this is like a major commercial strip. Like LA is basically one big suburb. You can see it's very like it's not very dense. And then down here is this little property that my parents owned, and like they actually rented out to people. And at the time, what happened was that they were actually under code enforcement, which is that like the local city basically came in and like wrote them up and say, hey man, like you're doing something illegal on site and you need to correct it. And around the same time, I was actually getting kicked out of my apartment, and I really couldn't afford anything like on the west side, which is the west side of LA, which is where most architects work, because that's really where all the architectural projects are, because that's where all the money is. And so it's interesting because like housing has always been a problem. You know, this is like in the late 90s, coming out of a recession. And so I kind of negotiated with them the opportunity to basically build a little loft at this property that they own. Now, you know, like, so, you know, you can see this is actually the existing condition. You know, like it's a single family home. All right, it's got a detached garage. There's like a little apartment unit in the back. All right, this is like they had actually illegally converted this patio into a unit, which is why they're under code enforcement. So you can actually see this like a little diagram that we did for it. Anyway, so I designed this this little loft that I could basically like occupy on my own. Now, like, you know, as a young architect, this is a really exciting thing. But because I was limited in resources, I had to kind of come up with some like some fairly like nimble tactics to actually kind of implement this idea. You know, like and what I discovered was that like I could really look at like aspects of a project that really wasn't normally kind of available or under the scrutiny of the architect, because now not only was I the designer of this building, I was also going to be the occupant as well as sort of the pseudo developer of the project, and so like I could really kind of mess with the budget. I could really kind of like prioritize things that I found important, you know, versus like a more conventional project, right? So like, you know, I basically put what little money I had like into windows and doors, you know, like a big tall spaces, you know, you know, like I'm trying to find the picture of the lot. There you go. Okay, cool. So, you know, like really tall ceilings. So there wasn't really anything like super kind of you know, nothing really ambitious design wise, right? But just something very clean. And while, you know, this was sort of not that it was ambitious in the sense for me, because like I was able to really discover that like, oh wow, like even though I was young, even though I was kind of like not, I was kind of lacking in experience. You know, once I actually was able to have that position in the project, I actually had leverage, and I was able to kind of really make this. I was able to control some of the levers of a project that, again, like most architects don't normally get. And this really opened up like all kinds of possibilities for me. Like for me, the way that I actually think about projects, and the way that I would actually discuss projects with like future clients. The other thing that happened with this project was that like I eventually like it ended up I ended up being acquainted with a number of tradespeople and builders. And what I discovered was that they were also not happy with the state of their practice. They were actually quite unhappy because like in a lot of cases, the builder would actually take on all the liability and risk, and either they don't get paid at the very end, and or they don't actually get any credit for the success of the project, right? This all kind of sounds familiar, even though it's coming out of a builder's mouth and not an architect's mouth. And so, you know, coincidentally, those guys were also that helped me build that loft. They were also kind of the same kind, like, you know, we're of the same age and of the same kind of like disposition. You know, we're kind of starting out, and we were kind of looking for opportunities to kind of like broaden our horizons. And so, of course, like in Los Angeles, again, it's a suburb, so like there's regardless of the recession and the economics, like there's always these single family projects. I mean, like there's just like, you know, these projects are available no matter like how bad or how great things are. And these projects are always, you know, there's a single family, you know, it's like a 1-story house, all right, there's a detached garage, there's a front yard or backyard, all right, and then there's a porch, right? This is kind of the the type of projects that we've been doing probably for the last 20 years. It's kind of the bread and butter of what we do. This is actually like a transit week of the loft. You can kind of see, like, in fact, that loft project that we did is it initially was developed as a single family lot, and like it kind of like over time was in aggregate, it basically got upzoned, and we were able to kind of like basically densify it kind of like slowly. So one of the things that we did was that like we would kind of look at the way the single family is actually kind of like developed, and we kind of questioned, we were very critical about like what we could really do about the project. Like the builder kind of wanted like to be able to kind of like develop value in a way that like that would be good for, I mean, he wasn't going to really, their intention wasn't really to occupy it. They really wanted to just sell it for profit.
Yes.
And so what I, what I wanted to do was I wanted to be in a position to be able to kind of like make sort of critical, like evaluation of projects like that, and like and ask questions of why are things built that way. And so then like we would actually go and really look at like, we would do like a lot of diagrams of looking at like how a lot can actually get improved in a way that's actually different than what other conventional developers are doing. And so on one project, this is the same guy that helped me build the loft. Was he bought a property out in West LA, and we kind of went to work. And it started out as like a single family detached garage. Initially we built a little kind of what today we call it an ADU. It's an accessory dwelling building, but back then they didn't have that allowed. But it was basically like a little accessory building that he could move into, right? And then we could like basically kind of take down the front house and build something. Initially, like a good way of actually kind of laying out a house would be that like we would actually kind of do an L-shaped plan, create kind of a yard, and then that would actually usually yield a pretty good project, right? But on this one, we were kind of a little more ambitious. There were some sort of site-specific things that made it it made it like less desirable to actually do an L-shaped plan, and so we did this thing where we basically stacked the program up in order to actually kind of yield even more yard. There's actually like a neighbor over here that actually had like a bit of a deck that we were trying not to block too. But then we went up to a third story, which in these parts, going up 3 stories in a single family neighborhood is kind of frowned upon. And so, but nonetheless, we did this thing, and luckily in that neighborhood, there really isn't like a design review or anything kind of like that, and we can kind of go and just get permits without really anybody kind of like scrutinizing what we're doing. So this is kind of what we ended up with like kind of like living space downstairs, and then bedrooms kind of stacked up top. Like my builder developer friend was like just like thrilled. He was just like he couldn't get started building this fast enough. And then and he just started. We kind of like and one of the things actually we about this is that like we ended up engineering this ourselves, meaning that like I actually did the engineering for this, which is kind of quite unusual for an architect to do that. And one of the things that happens in some of the other projects that we've done is that like we've run into a lot of kind of resistance from some of the engineering consultants that we get that we can afford when we try to do something this kind of daring, because some of these cantilevers are a little big. And what happens is that like they either just say no, or they basically come up with a solution that like doesn't quite meet what our expectations are, right? And so then when that happened enough to me on a number of projects, I basically said, "I screw this. Like I'm just going to figure out how to do this." And I kind of did, well, with some assistance, obviously. Like I had some people that knew engineering as well, and like we kind of got together and kind of figured this out. As well as other engineers that was willing to help me. And so it's actually kind of funny because when we actually submitted this for plan check, because this is actually one of the first projects I did when I actually got licensed. And out here in California, you're a licensed architect, you're actually allowed to stamp calcs. And so I got a lot of side eye from the building department when I submitted calcs for this project. Anyway, that's some of the finished pictures of the project. That cantilever in the front really was just to try to kind of create this this kind of porch space that's up front here, which actually is an important aspect of a lot of my work. Like especially with single families, like the porch space with a lot of developers kind of gets it kind of gets like kind of compromised. I don't know if most developers understands the kind of the importance of like the porch space and then the yard and like, you know, its engagement to the street. But this was our way of actually kind of like creating that kind of like public space of like a suburban home. This is kind of like an overhead view. And then, you know, then we moved on into other projects as well. Actually, on this one, he ultimately moved into the house. My builder development friend. Even though his intent was to sell it, like he was so in love with the house that eventually he just moved in. And this is actually kind of a weird phenomenon that like developers would hire me to help them design a house. I would do something really exciting, and then they get really excited about it, and inevitably they would occupy. So that actually happened on this one too. This is actually in Venice. This property is kind of like a pie shape. And you know, like we started off with this kind of like diagram where we kind of figure out a buildable envelope, right? We try to fit in the kind of program that they would like, that we were able to kind of get in there, that could sell, right? I always inevitably end up like within the analysis, find somewhere where I can actually kind of tweak it or find the architecture, that's as I like to say in the office. And in this one, what happened was that like, you know, once you actually laid everything out, because this is like a really tight site, the property is really only about like, I think it's like about 3,000 square feet. And it was actually entitled with like a garage and like a guest house back here already, which, you know, the client didn't really want to get rid of. And so I had to kind of work around this little tight site in the front. But one of the things that happened was that like this upper kind of gray box here is actually kind of like the private bedroom spaces. Is that like the way that the plan laid out was that like I kind of left this little void that's right here. It's actually right above the entry and the kind of like the living space below. And everybody loved it. You know, when I first presented it, you know, when I first built the model and kind of showed everybody, all the clients, and they were like, "Oh my God, this is great!" Right? You know, they kind of green lighted. And that's that void right there. It basically goes straight down. It's basically nothing. It's just a capture space. And it's got like a little roof deck and, you know, a little roof access. You can actually kind of really see how the second floor kind of towers over this thing and creates this kind of like outdoor space here. That's that little void space that's right there. It's going to kind of go up. Anyways, like with most construction projects and development projects, what happens is that like, you know, you kind of run into challenges along the way, meaning that either the market turns or the client, you know, has cold feet. That happens a lot. There may be some technical issue or whatever it is, right? So the hilarious thing about this project was that like, as we were doing it, you know, every time we ran into a problem, whatever it is, like their first gut reaction was to try to seal this thing up and turn it into floor area. And I would, you know, usually go through my usual hawing and heing and telling him, hey man, like I think that's really most of the architecture in the building, and like I think you're really shooting yourself in the foot if you kind of get rid of it, right? So like throughout the construction process and the development process, you know, like I really had to fight for that thing. So like this is the case, even though like, you know, on a lot of these projects, I actually kind of had already negotiated myself into a position with leverage. And yet, like even within that scenario, like the architecture always kind of ends up becoming the target, like in these projects, right? But at the end of the day, you know, like they sell this thing, they literally make $1 million. That's really what happened, right? And like then they want to do another one, and they want to be more daring. So, which is great because like as I develop this track record, right, like then there's a little more trust, I think, for them to actually let me do things that are a little nutty. Here's some more pictures of this thing. This is actually a corner pocket door. It was like the first time and the last time I ever got one of these in. I try to propose these like in a project every once in so often, and this is one of the only projects I was able to get this in. There's that void that's in there. Inevitably later on, the actual occupants of this building, they actually, because I don't ever get to meet the people well, actually that's not true. Sometimes I do. They actually seek me out and they kind of call me up. Mostly they ask me for my CAD. But then they also kind of compliment me like, hey man, like you did a good job, and that like this is actually like working the way that I think you intended, which is actually very satisfying. Okay, so then the guy that sold that other house for like $1 million actually like went and kind of put all that money into this this corner commercial property, which is also kind of in West LA. So this was a little bit out of our wheelhouse because we were doing mostly single families at that point, right? But like again, I was young and I was gung ho, so I was like, screw it. And so this lot is kind of zoned and kind of like for basically what you would eventually end up with, like what's usually mostly in LA on a commercial corner, like on a major boulevard, which is like a typical like strip mall, right? You got your commercial area, your commercial space here. You got your parking for the parking lot, right? There's an alley back here. There's your signage, right? And people pull over. Right? This could be a Circle K. In fact, actually, this lot used to be a gas station, and that would be great. Like, but my client basically got this thing, and he kind of didn't know what to do with it. And so him and I kind of got together and said, hey, we should do something kind of more urban, right? And so then we kind of got to work, and we discovered that like we were actually able to do what's called like by right, meaning that like it wouldn't require like a lot of scrutiny, like from the sort of like review agencies to kind of build something which basically translates into like a quicker permit, and it's quicker to get shovel into the ground. And so that was kind of one of the goals on this, right? So then we further kind of like refined the buildable envelope until we kind of like, what we ended up with is fairly close to what's allowable by envelope, right? And this is a kind of a mixed use building. We kind of like elevated it like to get the parking because, again, this is LA and parking's kind of king. So you have to kind of make room for parking. We ended up with like a little kind of like walk up restaurant down here, right? There's like a big office space on the second floor, and then there's a single family on the third floor. This is a project under construction. This is actually finished. This client again fell in love with the project, and he also tried to move into this thing. Later on, I figured out that wasn't just the thing that he really liked. I think he really did appreciate these spaces and these buildings that we were doing, right? But what I was also discovering was that like the guy was trying to save on capital gains. So that makes a lot of sense because he could live there for a year or two and then like basically not save 35% in capital gains. So yeah, like that makes a lot of sense. I don't know if he was going to be able to do this on here though, right? But right around this time, this is 2008, so the market was about to come tumbling down. In fact, he got really lucky on this one. He was able to kind of unload it before the market went like kaput, and he did make some good money on this. That's actually this is the office that's on the second floor. This is the single family upstairs. These sort of like oblique drawings that we actually did these like years later, just because we thought that they actually presented a lot of our projects in kind of an interesting and weird way. Okay, so then like right around this time, like I kind of like dipped my toe back into sort of like self-development, and plus the other thing was that I was still living in that San Gabriel loft, which is about 20-25 miles from West LA, where all my work is. Right? So I was commuting like a crazy person. And then so 2 accidents later, like I was really like, I really needed to move back out to West LA. And so then I bought this little triplex, this little kind of like, it's like a bungalow that like they kind of took the plan, they kind of split it. Like it's a kind of like a, like, you know, it's kind of like it's like this. So it's like a little triplex. You can it's 3 units. It's got a, you know, it's got like a little detached garage, 3-car garage, right? Curiously, this lot was zoned medium density zoning, right? So really, like, I could have built like a 4-story, you know, like 8-unit, like, you know, like building here. Right? I obviously didn't do that, nor did I have the capital to do that. I explored other ways of actually kind of like, you know, like, you know, improving this thing that's both, you know, like conducive to what my needs were, as well as like, you know, sort of from an investment point of view as a developer, right? And ultimately, what I ended up like with was that, like, you know, this would be a good, what I like to call like a almost like a real estate lifeboat, because when we got this, like I had already, I mean, I saw the writing on the wall. I kind of knew that there was a recession coming and it could be really bad. And again, like when I first started, I came out of a recession, so I kind of like was preparing, kind of battening down the hatches a little bit. And this was my idea of doing this. So, you know, I dumped at that time every dollar I had into purchasing this thing, right? And like, you know, like a ton of sweat equity. And then like what I knew was that was going to be possible was that like with 3 units, I could basically play kind of like musical chair occupancy, depending on what my needs are and what the conditions were, right? So like my initial thing was that like, hey, I'm going to take down the back unit, right, which is this thing here, right? I would improve it, right, and then move in, right? If anything ever happened, which it did, right, you know, like by 2008, 2009, like, you know, there really was no work left, right? You know, like, and so then, you know, I could rent this thing out and I could move into the front unit, right? And then later on, like what could happen is that like, you know, when I see the, you know, at the same time with the 3rd unit, I was actually still collecting rent. And then actually I moved my office, at that point I had already moved my office into the garage, right? So like I was really maximizing the use of this property, right? To basically to survive a recession. And then like, you know, as time will go on, like, and then I would kind of putz along and survive, right? And then I'll save enough money, right? And then I would actually like develop the middle unit, right? And ultimately, like what would happen is that like, you know, I would save more money and then like, you know, possibly like I improve the front unit. This is kind of the kind of transoblique diagram of, you know, it's a little prettier than the previous diagram. You know, this is the back unit. In fact, I actually got married in this one. You know, my wife and I, like, we kind of joked that like we didn't spend the money on the wedding, we spent the money on the house. So it makes sense that we would get married here, right? And so then like in 2011, at that point, we basically like, by then we actually had a couple of kids. And like we needed a little, well, actually, let's step back, like that happened in 2007, right before the economy collapsed, right? And then like we moved into the front unit, right? And then by 2011, we had saved up enough money, and like, you know, we were able to do the middle unit, and we moved into that, right? And the plan was to actually do like a 3rd unit in the front, right? Improve that, right? And then like basically rent it all out and maybe move into a bigger house, right? But that the last one never actually really happened. This is a picture of that back unit being built. Because you know, this being my second project for myself, like I really wanted to have a roof deck. And so they actually had a good view. What I discovered about roof decks is that like they're great as an idea, but like they don't really work very well after a while because it's just a lot of stairs to get up there. Let's see here. Yeah, there's that roof deck on the right there, the little sleeper deck on there. So you got a little yard back there. This is when we took down the middle unit. And so it was almost urban, actually. You know, like I was like working in like an existing kind of like small lot in Manhattan or something. This is the middle unit getting framed. It was actually right around this time, like, you know, because this is a really small unit, and like I actually had a little bit of resources to kind of start messing around a little bit. And like and get out of stucco. I mean, all my other projects prior to this was all stucco and drywall. That was like my medium, right? Because we really couldn't afford anything other than that. And so So yeah, we actually, that's actually a fiber cement board. So that's actually kind of fun. This unit actually has, because it's in the middle, it's actually kind of very limited in the yard space, because this is the driveway, which we have to keep clear for parking. And the other side is actually just a little side yard. And so like this roof deck actually worked out really well because it wasn't really that far from the first floor. There was only one flight of stairs, right? And this basically becomes kind of like the main open space for this unit. You also notice that these pictures are really nice because by then I actually had a little bit of money to actually pay for a photographer. All my previous projects, actually, I couldn't afford a photographer. There's a roof deck. I was looking for a picture of my office with this garage door open and I couldn't find it. So all you're gonna get to see is just my basketball court. Again, this is like the whole single family thing. So then from here, okay, so as we were coming out of like the early part of this decade, like in 2011, 2012, right? Like some of my clients started getting bold again and they wanted to do spec houses, right? So again, like this diagram of this space, this suburban house, it kind of came back into my office. Now, like a lot of like spec houses that are being built like in West LA and getting sold for a lot of money kind of looks like this, right? You know, like it's kind of like this, except it's not one story, it's two story. The garage now has moved to the front and displaced my beloved porch space. And it's got a second story on it. It's kind of big, right? And then they kind of like wrap it up in, the developers out here really love batten board. It doesn't really matter what the style of the house is. They try to wrap it in batten board. I don't know what the hell that's about, but anyway. But this is the kind of like, this is the bulk of the market. Like 90% of the houses that are getting built or look like this, or they're being built like this. And what I was trying to do was basically do something different. The program is the same. It's still a garage. There's an attached garage. You know, it's still like about a 2,500 square foot house, right? It's 2 stories. But what I did was I basically wrapped it around like the courtyard. And being that the courtyard became the primary space of these projects, right? That might sound simple, and for architects that may actually sound like, oh well, no duh, right? But for developers, that's kind of like, you know, that's kind of a no-go for them, simply because it actually costs more money to build this way. It's nominally more expensive, but it's not, because like if you actually build this, like you're basically getting more floor area for less like exterior wall, which is expensive, right? Versus this, right? There's actually a lot more exterior wall. But the thing is that like, and glass, of course, right? You know, you can see how this is like a lot of, this is a lot of glazing. But the thing is that like, you want to live here, you don't want to live here, right? You know, like, but they're both selling for $3 million. So it's no wonder that like a lot of these houses that we started doing in 2012 were basically selling before they hit the market. Because like most of the people walking around looking for a house, like would walk into this and go, like, well, okay, well, yeah, like clearly this is a better place to live in. So this is one project that we did, right? And we started doing like one project a year. This is like another one, right? Like right down the street, same thing, you know, like with some variation, right? You know, like it's second story. There's an alley back here, so, you know, the detached garage. The courtyard is still here, right? You know, there's kind of like a little front thing, right? Again, like, I'm going to kind of spare everybody of I actually didn't get any pictures of these things. These are actually real estate pictures, which are terrible. And so like, so I just picked the pictures of actually the courtyard, which is the most important thing about these projects, right? This is another one, right? Again, like this actually has the attached garage up front. This house actually curiously had this enormous tree up front that I actually made the effort to save. Right, and then and this one was actually only one story. This is the heyday of us being very conscientious doing spec houses, right? Where we're not only are we not building out the maximal envelope, like, but we're going one story, which is like almost revolutionary. But again, like the courtyard is kind of like the primary space. You know, we kind of like we lay out all the spaces all the way around it. And you can see like that fire pit was not my idea. That's again, like sometimes the builder kind of has his own kind of like contribution to the design. and again, as things kind of progressed, like the houses got bigger, the budgets got bigger, because they were making more money, right? And like they started realizing that like all the little things I'm proposing, all these sort of design value added type things that we were doing was actually really kind of helping them make a lot of money. So then I'm getting more glass and even bigger courtyards, and now pools are making it into these like suddenly this is starting to look like architectural digest. And like so this is like another, so like what I was trying to do is I was actually kind of, as we were taking incremental steps towards basically more architecture, because I've kind of convinced them to that actually makes more money, right? Like I started to get even more bold like with some of the stuff. So like for example, like this one actually was, you can see they try to do batten board here again. But on this one, I actually got some more control over the finish of the building, right? And so it actually kind of translated pretty closely to what I designed. Although we had a disagreement over color. As you can see, my renderings are green and they really wanted gray. So I lost out. They actually had what's called a broker's open, and all the real estate agents kind of walked through there, and they love the house, but they kind of threw up about the green. And so I had to kind of change the color palette for them. This one was interesting because like they got really ambitious. They actually bought 2 properties. And basically they didn't want to pay for 2 designs, although I eventually convinced them to pay me for 2 designs, right? But they didn't want the 2 houses to look exactly the same, and so then I ended up designing 2 different houses for the same plan. So that was kind of interesting because like it was one of these things where like I wonder how the market was going to react, whether lay people was going to be able to figure out that like these 2 houses 4 properties apart are going to be able to figure out like that they were the same, right? And actually that became irrelevant because like the style of the house, the thing that was proven here is that like the style of the house was actually really important to people, because these both have courtyards. They were both laid out the same, except that this one here on the right, which again, like there's the batten board, is kind of more traditional. It's a little bit more of a mid-modern type of house, like, sold first and for more. And this one on the left did not. So that was kind of an interesting experiment that we were able to do. And then finally, we got really bold. On this one, it was right around that time that, like, I was doing conscientious work. I think I was, but like the other people were building more of those sort of like bigger and bigger, like batten board, kind of like what people call around here McMansions, right? And so the city was coming around really clamping down on McMansions, right? And they have actually, City of LA has a McMansion ordinance, right? And so what they were doing was basically they were bean counting square footage at that point, right? And so that became a square footage bean counter. And in some cases, like especially on this project, it became kind of a real problem, right? Like how do I, a lot of kind of, it was very restricting. And so what I was trying to do was kind of take that idea of a courtyard and like sort of the exterior occupancy of a suburban house and really kind of figure out a new way of actually occupying it, right? So we came up with this, and it's also kind of a way of kind of an FU to the mansionization like ordinance. And basically what it is, this is really simple. It's just a bar, right? Like living space on the first floor, like bedroom spaces on the second floor, and this is actually, I kicked this out for the garage, right? And this is the part where like I started running out of square footage, and so then like I basically did this big kind of like a box trellis. It's a steel structure that kicks out, right? It doesn't have a top or a bottom, right? This is actually the front of the house. Again, I got my porch space, which is great. And there it is, right? So we're gonna like basically kind of kick this big thing out, like not have a floor at the bottom, right? And we actually kind of like wanted to put like cargo netting in there, so that there's actually a little deck back there that their kids can actually just, or kids of the future occupants just kind of like stage dive out, right? We were able to kind of get it built. Same thing that happened on the other one, where that void was actually keep getting closed. Like the client and his partners kept trying to torch this thing off. They kept trying to like I don't understand what that thing is. Like, I don't know what it does, right? They clearly cut the budget because they didn't put in the privacy screening, nor my tree, or the cargo netting, right? But again, I got, I got my I got my cantilever structure. Again, it's supposed to look like this, it's like actually very recently the owner of this house contacted me, and like we had a long conversation. I sent him these images, right? And there's actually a small chance that this might happen. But again, the building's built. All right, the infrastructure for this thing is there, so they can certainly do it if they want to. So this was pretty daring to do something like this as a spec house, right? And yet it was still successful. They took the risk of doing this, right? And the guy that bought it like drove up during construction and saw this thing and decided, hey man, I really want this house, and went in and basically made a kind of like no limit offer. Like told him, hey, I don't know what you're gonna list this building at, but like, whatever it is, if anybody offers you more, like I'm gonna top that offer, don't sell it to that person, right? And so he ended up buying the house. And then I think I only have about 5 minutes left to kind of finish this off. So here's so again, like around 2014, 2015 area time, like I kind of again dipped my toe again for the third time back into kind of like architect developer role. Because right around that time, like my kids were getting kind of the school age, and I was actually looking for a place to kind of go so that I can send them to school. And that whole triplex thing just wasn't quite working as well for a growing family. And so then I started looking at properties here in Culver City. All right, this is actually an aerial view. You can actually see my project down here. That's Morphosis right there. And there's a bunch of other really great, incredible architects around here that I'm surrounded by. And you can see our light rail line. So this is actually a very urban part of LA, which is great. And so I purchased a property here. We kind of took down the existing house. I built another little garage back here. This is actually my office. This is where I'm sitting right now. It's basically a duplex stacked. I mean, I live upstairs. The downstairs is like a 3-bedroom unit. Within the footprint of the existing house, right? Again, I kind of like did a little kind of permutation here to actually create a porch space, right? And what I did was like the square footage up here is actually the same square footage as the lower floor. It's about 1,500 square feet. But what I did was I actually kind of rearranged the spacing in order to actually squeeze myself out like this rather large deck. It's like the front of it. Like, so the lower unit actually gets their own kind of entry. They kind of get like a covered porch deck with like windows. They got a private yard. Again, the photographs are a lot better now because again, I got a photographer, right? Which is also coinciding with the fact that I'm starting to win awards, because back then when I just send snapshots, like they really don't care. That's my office. That's where I'm sitting right now. And then like, because I got a little ambitious, and then my neighbor was selling his house, I went and bought his house. And so I don't know why I can't get this to go. Oh, there we go. Okay, cool. So on that one, I was a little less like, I didn't have as much money because I spent more money on the lot because again, like now we're going into the next bubble, right? And probably next recession. And so like, I was really only able to kind of rehab the existing bungalow, kept the existing garage, right? And then build like a little, like 2-bedroom unit in the back. Like this is like in a lot of these houses, like, this thing was actually wrapped in stucco, it's like taking the carpet off and you find like hardwood floors. Like with LA, it's like, you take stucco off and you find like, like 1920s era, like siding. But basically I rebuilt all of this. That's that unit in the back. This is actually a picture of this from my deck. Again, like at this point now, I'm actually exploring like kind of like the next iteration of how this is working, right? Which is that like I'm looking at ways of sort of densifying Los Angeles, right? We're in an extreme housing crisis, obviously, as everybody knows, in the entire country, not just LA, right? This property was $1 million too, which is insane. All right. And a lot of people around here are like buying $1 million properties to build a single family house, right? So like, yeah, I don't, I mean, I still do those projects for developers, right? But like, it's kind of like not what's needed, right? So then I did, because this is my project, I did what was needed, which is like, I kind of densified. So there's 3 units on this site, I'm able, and the way that I got it penciled out is that I'm able to rent it out at like kind of like close to, if not like below market rates. And my tenants are really thankful for that. Okay, I'm gonna blow right through this. This is my last project. This is something that we've been working on for the last 2 years, right? And so we're kind of escalating out into beyond kind of single family and kind of densifying suburban homes, right? We're doing kind of like a mixed use, like 5-story, like wood framed over podiums, right? These types of buildings are kind of like plentiful and all over the place, right? And they're kind of dull. This is we're doing analysis for kind of like the buildable envelope right now. In this case, the sort of review and the approval process is actually a lot more arduous, right? There's a lot more like kind of input from the community, and like, there's multiple like agencies in the city that actually kind of like, basically there's really no room for me to really do anything. Like, like the building almost designs itself, which is kind of disappointing. And so like, I can go back. So I mean, that's basically that part that, because you see that diagram there, like, like it's, when it's done, like, this is an example, this is actually a building around the corner from me. Like there's actually a variety of different corporate companies that actually kind of do these types of things, right? And then you end up with like projects like this, which is perfectly fine, right? But I just, well, actually this one's not perfectly fine. This one is somebody's like, like it's their sample board, like in their office, is dumped onto a building. It's kind of horrible. This is also around the corner from me. You can actually see my building over here. I actually live way back here. And like, I mean, just like a little bit of everything, like these sort of open spaces, which by the way are required as part of the kind of like the approval. You have to have like a certain amount of like balconies and so on. Like, like are kind of like haphazardly kind of thrown on here. I apologize if anybody knows the person that designed this. It's like, I'm not trying to rag on them. I just like, this is a bad example of housing. And so then, like, again, like all my other projects, I spend a lot of time kind of like looking at really kind of like mining the parameters of a project to figure out like where I can find the architecture, right? So again, like, planning departments basically all over the country love to try to like mandate design, right? And a lot of times they really kind of like, they shoot themselves in the foot, like, because it really doesn't result in good design, right? It basically just hamstrings the architect. And so in this one, like, they actually, they have these like silly kind of like mandated like articulation of the facade, right? And so I just took it to the next level, right? Which is that like, I kind of created a giant grid, right? I based it on like light and ventilation requirements for a dwelling unit, right? As well as egress windows, right? Which was a 30-inch wide window with 30-inch wide operable window by 8 feet tall, right? And then I just basically kind of ran it around here, right? All these units are kind of like sort of individual in the sense that like, they're not all the same shape on the plan, right? And then those windows are going to end up kind of like randomly placed on the facade, right? But then the way that we did it with the facade was that like, it actually kind of like ties the whole thing together while also kind of like just like underlining the kind of the kind of randomness of the windows, right? And so so we ended up with his. So that's really, that's kind of like all we were able to really do, and we were able to kind of convince the client that this is the way to go. Although again, like all my other projects, they're still kind of like. I mean, I just got an email 2 weeks ago saying, "Hey, we think we can find a way to save money and not do this," and I was just like, "No, dude." And then of course, like then I have to bring out the big guns because like, like all these little renderings that I do in my office, like I don't have like a lot of powerful like tools or equipment in my office. Oh, if you count the crappy 3D printer, maybe we did some 3D printing to kind of like really show this stuff. I gave him one. That's actually one of the only thing that helps with the 3D printer is that like I'm able to kind of give my client a thing to take home, like a trophy. All right, like he went to the carnival. But that's Oh, anyways, so then I finally kind of broke down and I went and spent some money and I got a third party rendering company to kind of like do some kick-ass renderings for me, right? And now he's back on board. He's good with this facade. He's gonna do this now. So at least until something else comes up and he gets cold feet again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. It was very interesting projects and a very good. I'm just gonna clap, everyone. A very good project, and it's like a very good journey that you go through. So I'm gonna leave the stage open for people who wants to ask question. You can ask your question, put it in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Bill, for the presentation. We see a lot of different folks coming in presenting. Many of them are with the big companies like Gensler and so on. And so it's good, sort of refreshing to see how you can also develop a career with a small practice. And I think for students, we all have different affinities and desires, and this is certainly a direction anyone could take. Yeah.
I find this very refreshing as well, because I think this is something that our students can definitely associate a lot better if they were to go down the journey of architecture, and you being a very successful example of what it could be. And we just love the way how you show the progress of your design. It's almost as if you just kind of show in your mind what you're thinking. I do have a question, which is when you work with the private owner versus the developer, and I always wonder, is it harder to work with the developer directly, or would it be the owner when it comes to single family? But I think yeah.
That's a good question. So yeah, like I all those projects are for developers that we did, other than the ones that I live in or I owned. But then I was acting like a developer. I obviously have like an iceberg's worth of other projects that actually are more traditional, right? There's a private person has a house, they want to build whatever they need, whatever improvement requirements that they have, right? They hire me, right? And we have the typical conventional architect, owner, like builder, sort of like triumvirate, like kind of relationship, right? Where we execute projects, right? So I've done those ad nauseum, right? Like I have hundreds and hundreds of those projects, right? I just don't show anybody, right? Because what I find for me is that like I speak the language of developers very well. Like them and I kind of like, I mean, I think developers obviously get like a bad rap. Like I've also have worked with really bad developers as well, right? I also don't show people those projects. Because yeah, they ride roughshod over my ideas, right? And we just never work together again. But with private clients, the problem is that like, in fact, when I first started writing this, I actually wrote a little thing about that to differentiate between a private client and a developer client, right? Or a client building spec. Is that like, there's even more factors beyond just making a profit, right? That goes into building a house for yourself. Like there's a lot of emotion. There's multiple parties involved, right? Like even with, like, for example, a husband and wife, right? Like sometimes a husband and wife isn't on the same page, right? And that makes it really difficult. Like when you forget about, I mean, like I took the path that I thought like got me the best opportunity to really try out ideas, right? To be as critical as possible, which is what I learned in school, right? Like I learned, hey, like the great architecture comes from being really critical of everything, like the process, what you're doing, the history, whatever. Right. And like, that was a disappointing thing, is that like when I was working on those projects, right, like seriously, like the husband and wife don't really give a shit about what all that stuff, right, that I learned in school, or being critical. They don't want you being critical of the house, of what they're doing. They just want their 3 bedrooms and 2 baths, right, and their trellis, and go home, right? That's really what they want. Like they really don't care about that, right? Whereas like with the developer, I have the opportunity to convince them that, hey man, like I have this take, right? I have this idea about whatever. It could be formal complexity. It could be sustainability. It could be being green. hey man, I can do this crazy thing with like solar panels, right? Whatever it is, right? I can do a crazy box trellis, like you can stage dive into like a, into cargo netting. Like with them, it's like, I'm using the profit motive as a way of like kind of motivating them to do architecture, which is kind of sick, right? Like that I'm trying to do that. And it's not, I mean, like, I'm not successful every time, right? Like I'm only, like, I think my batting average is like probably like $1.50, trying to like get them to do that. Right. But with private clients, there's no shot, I feel, in my, like I don't have access. Well, actually, I take that back. So there aren't any multimillionaires or billionaires hiring me to do projects out in the middle of the forest, on 40 acres in Telluride, right? Like that hasn't happened yet, right? Although now that I'm kind of getting some notoriety, I'm actually getting projects like that, right? But the thing is that like when I was starting out in the last 20 years, like I didn't have that opportunity, right? And so like I didn't want to have, like I didn't think that I was ever going to get that kind of opportunity. And so then like working with developers, working for myself as a way of kind of manufacturing like opportunities, right? So that's kind of why I like, because it's not that I haven't worked with like private clients. I have. It's just that it didn't really yield like interesting architecture.
That's very interesting because my experience has mostly been working directly with the developer, and everything comes down to the square footage, the profit per. Yeah. So it's interesting to see the emotions with the private owner, and that you actually don't get the stuff done. That's kind of interesting.
Right, like they'll randomly put the project on hold for some reason. There could be a death in the family, the kids are going to school. I mean, there's a lot of delays. I mean, like the last private project I did like took 6 years, like, and it wasn't like nothing. It took a 1-story addition, like it really shouldn't have taken that long, right? But like personal stuff happens, right? Whereas the developer is under the gun, they want that thing on the market, right? That's also the pace that I enjoy as well. Like I like working fast. Like I don't want to dwell on a project, like I want to just kind of like get it out there. The other thing is that like I love the other thing about my projects is that like I kind of really dumb down the ideas because they're not highfalutin whatsoever. I mean, like I strive to maybe hit 1, 2, maybe 3 ideas like on a project, right? And then I really keep hitting those ideas, right? I really focus on that, right? Like, I don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. Like I want that thing done. Like, and if I get it, then like it's great. Like all that other stuff is, whatever. So.
Yeah, that's interesting because with the private owner, I find that they sometimes don't really know what they want, and it works out great to have the developer as the middle person because the developer develops a project and kind of almost if you go out to buy a product, it's showing you that this is the final product. You either buy it or you don't buy it. Just like when we go to the store to buy a piece of clothing versus going to a tailor and have something made, and then just don't know what they want. So I thought that pretty interesting that this developer role is actually pretty crucial in this development, this process. Yeah.
Students have any questions?
I had a question. So a lot of your work was on like single family homes or like duplexes. Is this apartment building like mixed use the biggest project you've ever done, or have you done others around the same size?
Yeah, that last project will be the biggest project I've ever like executed out of my office. I actually have taken jobs like with bigger companies like in the past. Like some of the projects I presented were done like on the side. Like I was moonlighting. I was actually working for somebody else. I've worked on like a museum. I worked on like a big team on a skyscraper, right? Like like I was just a cog. I was going to meetings and stuff, right? But and I didn't learn nearly as much working on those projects as I did on these smaller projects, right? And then like a lot of the stuff that I learned on these smaller projects actually translates into like the next 6-story tall project. And a lot of it is strategizing, like what I think I could really kind of leverage within that process to get architecture, right? It's always about that, right? Because otherwise, like, as an architect, like what's my role? You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to be just a draftsperson, right? Which like, there's a slippery slope that happens like when you work that way, right? Where like, you're not bringing value to that position, right? I mean, as an architect, we hear that like, idealistically that like, we should be the leaders, right? I see all these symposiums in my local AIA chapter about like, hey, they talk about housing, right? And they kind of like get really gung ho about it, right? but then it's like, okay, well, like, how are you, like, as an architect, like, I mean, we're seriously, like, even today, like, we're still kind of marginalized. I mean, like, you can be a star architect maybe, and you have that kind of like cachet to kind of like really throw your weight around, right? But like, but with these types of projects, you know, it's actually kind of infill, you know what I mean? It's almost kind of like, you know, like hard hat, kind of like working man kind of thing, you know what I mean? Like even though there's a lot of money involved and there's like rich developers who are trying to kind of like sell this thing, right? Like, but like I'm trying to find a role, like, you know, like I'm trying to find like what value I can add to it, right? Regardless of the size of the project, right? Because otherwise, yeah, like I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I don't want to just roll in going, yep, you know, like I'm just a code consultant, right? You know, and I'm going to help you get a permit. Like then I'm going to regress back to like, yeah, like I'm not going to get anything. I'm not going to make any kind of contribution at all, either to the project or, you know, if I can even be more like broadly to the community, right? You know, like, and you hear people talk about it all the time, right? Like, oh my God, that's an ugly building. I mean, I just did it right now, right? I showed you that building around the corner from me, and I basically like kind of like poo-pooed on it, right? You know, and but I'm not the only person. Like, there are other people in the neighborhood that talk about it too, right? And you know, and they charge a grip to live there, right? So you know, like, so it actually has an impact on your community, right? You know, like you can kind of say that an ugly building, oh, so what, right? You know, there's always going to be ugly buildings, right? You know, but there are other kind of like ancillary impacts to that too. Like if you don't do a good building, you know, like if I don't kind of add the value of being an architect to that project, right? You know, yes, and somebody else could have done it for cheaper, you know, like a less headache, right? You know, but again, I would like to think that the way that I go about it is like, you know, it's a more likely chance that architecture actually gets implemented in the community.
So Bill, is that a MakerBot on your shelf there?
Yes.
Throw that out of the window. Get an Ultimaker. They're much better.
I don't want to do any more 3D printing. It's just a time suck.
Anyway, if you plan on buying one, buy that. It's from Holland. They're much better.
So student, do you have more question or?
Yeah, I have a question. Maybe I missed something, but I think you haven't told about told about the sustainability of your buildings. I would like to hear about that.
The thing about sustainability is that, like, in California, we have what's called Title 24. It's Title 24 energy compliance, right? The thing is that, like, California has always been very like progressive about like green design, as well as like energy savings, right? You know, like zero carbon, right? And so a lot of those things are kind of like, it's already kind of built into the code. So like all the buildings that I built like are code compliant to Title 24. Like actually I have to have like a Title 24 like consultant like work on those things, right? So a lot of it is envelope design, right? And then like a window and door kind of R value type stuff. You know, like solar ready, like a lot of pictures, some of them actually have solar energy in there, right? Like it's not the primary focus of my projects, right? But like they are kind of like in Title 20, and like if you actually compare Title 24 compliance to California, right? Again, it's much further ahead than the rest of the country, right? It's roughly equivalent to like LEED certification. The last time I did LEED certification, like I think 25 points is like sort of certified, right? Like if you actually took like all the sort of compliance of Title 24, like it'd be like 21 points. So it would be like 4 points away from LEED certification just by doing like Title 24 compliance, right? And so, like again, like this. I mean, this is one of the kind of like the double-edged sword of working for developers, right? Like, you know, they'll do just enough to kind of get a permit or to get the project done, right? You know, and so like my focus isn't necessarily just like, you know, if I find that opportunity, absolutely, like, you know, I think it actually kind of like parallels or dovetails with like what we're doing. The primary thrust of the design, right? And yeah, you know, I mean, for a while there, that box trellis was going to have like photovoltaics around it. You know, that was actually, you know, but actually we modeled that and it was really ugly. And you know, and then ultimately, like whatever I propose, like the client sometimes just doesn't quite implement, right? So, but that's kind of where that is. I mean, like, yeah, it's not the primary focus of my sort of my design practice, but we do try to do it as much as we can.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Bill. I think that we are almost like at 12 minutes, 30 minutes over time. I don't want to be interrupting the conversation. But I want to thank you for taking time and participating in our lecture series and showing all your fabulous project. It was quite a journey and we loved it. And I hope that our students learn from you and your project as well. So